Yo, what's up, guys? In this video, we are going to hit that FHIR book. Gonna hit that fire. Hopefully, we'll finish it today. When I was young, I'm still young, I used to listen to books 10, 12 hours straight, and no one could stop me back then. But now, 1.5 hours, really? But those were self help books, much low effort, low kind of thing. This one is actually a more educational type book. So let's see. Let's uh, hmm. So I'm trying to load that book. Why? You close this, reopen. You know what? I'm trying. So let me see if this right. But I can listen to unlimited. This is what I don't understand. These people. If they gave me a time limit, I would have probably just paid $2. Anyway, it's exactly what I wanted, and it works perfectly. Principles of health, interpretability, interoperability, oh my god, how do you even pronounce that? Interportability, inter is interpretability. Now I want interoperability. Oh my god, interoperability.
Interoperability.
Interoperability. Interoperability. Oh my god. It's really amazing to have a great interoperability. Interoperability.
Interoperability.
Interoperability. It's really great to have a system with a great interoperability. It's really great to have a system with great in, interoperability.
Interoperability.
Interoperability. All right. Interoperability. Interoperability. Meow. So let's start doing this. So I will off my mic and then we will go from there.
25. An alternative view is that the standards available have been overly complex and expensive to implement and maintain. This view has led to the development of FHIR, Fast Health Interoperability Resources. The volume of transactions in healthcare is mind-boggling. For example, in 2007, a single EHR system at one large hospital, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, processed more than 660 million HL7 V2 messages a year, about 2 million messages a day. 2. This indicates the size of the prize to be won. Examples of functions include requests for tests and investigations, prescriptions for medicines and treatment, orders for nursing care, equipment, meals, and transport, test reports, administration notifications for changes in patient details and scheduling, letters from one clinician to another, such as referral, clinic, and discharge letters, transfer and merging of medical records, aggregate information for management, audit and monitoring, commissioning, billing, and accountancy. 2. Anthony J. Personal Communication 2008. Figgy 2.2 Standards Economics, Why Standards Are Needed 26. Combinatorial Explosion. The number of links needed to connect n different systems increases according to the formula. N number of links equals minus equals n and n1, 2, 2. Linking two nodes needs only a single interface, which can be agreed quite easily by a couple of people sitting around a table. Linking 6 nodes requires 15 interfaces. Linking 100 nodes requires 4,950 interfaces. This is a combinatorial explosion. The center of the star at the right of the figure below, Fig. 2.3 indicates a single standard specification, the star, being used for linking 6 domains. This replaces the 15 links, each of which could be different, shown on the left-hand side as squares. Translations. Every type of computer system holds data internally in a different way. This means that to communicate, data must be translated from one internal language or format into another. Linkage involves translating to a standard wire format that is understood by each party. This requires 2 translations, first from the native language of the sender to the wire format, and then from the wire format to the native language of the recipient. HL7 standards, including FHIR, provide a common lingua franca to do just this. The Rosetta from ancient Egypt, now in the British Museum, provides an analogy, Fig 2.4. This contains the same proclamation in 3 languages, used by the priests, hieroglyphic, the court, Greek, and the people, Demotic. In our context, the 3 languages could be those of the sending system, the receiving system, and a common wire format used for information interchange, such as HL7. The meaning of a message must be precisely the same in each language, although the Fig 2.3. The benefits of one standard 2. Why interoperability is hard 27 notation is quite different. The inscribers of the Rosetta Stone needed to perform their translation once only, but in
I need to get my earphones because it's kind of hard for me to hear. Oop. There you go. Now if I just do this.
digital interoperability, every message has to be translated from one format to another without error every time. The choice of interchange language is not sufficient to ensure interoperability. Each transaction must be defined in stringent, unambiguous detail as part of a complete, consistent, coherent, and computer-readable set of specifications. It must also be handled throughout in a way that meets all relevant safety and privacy regulations. This is what makes interoperability hard. Electronic health records. The original vision of an electronic health record, EHR, was a collection of statements which provide a record of what clinicians have heard, seen, thought, and done, 10. However, the health record is also the key source of information used to support claims for payment, for research, and to defend legal actions. This has led to additional information being added for bureaucratic, financial, research, or legal purposes, making it harder to use as a clinical tool. However, the EHR is not really a collection of facts, but rather a set of observations about a particular patient, made by clinicians, each at a specific time and place and context. It is quite possible for 2 statements about the same event to disagree with each other. Such disagreements can often be resolved if the context or Figure 2.4, Rosetta Stone, Hans Hillewert, CC by SA 4.0. Electronic health records 28 provenance of each statement is known. This is metadata, typically covering what type of thing it is, who stated it, when, and where. As with a work of art, a statement without provenance is of doubtful validity. ISO 13606. The ISO 13606 Reference Model 3 for electronic health record communication sets out a hierarchical structure for clinical information which is similar to that used in OpenEHR. It identifies 8 logical levels, Fig 2.5. EHR. The electronic health record for one person. Folder high-level organization of the EHR. Folders may be used as containers for grouping compositions by episode, care team, clinical specialty, condition, or time period. Composition. A composition is a set of information relating to a specific clinical encounter, session, or document. Each composition shares common metadata such as the author, subject, patient, date, time, and location. Progress notes, laboratory test reports, discharge summaries, clinical assessments, and referral letters are all examples of compositions. Once created, a composition is immutable, cannot be changed. The EHR is made up of compositions. Compositions may be grouped together into folders and subfolders. Section A section is a grouping of related entries within a composition, usually under a heading such as history, risk factors, medication, examination findings, diagnoses, investigations, and plans, reflecting the workflow and consultation process. Sections may have subsections. Entry. Each entry is a statement about a single observation, evaluation, or instruction. Think of it as a single row in a spreadsheet. Examples include the entries about a symptom, test, problem, or treatment. Entries may be grouped together in sections. Each composition comprises a number of entries. Entries are also known as clinical statements. 3. The current version is ISO 13606-1 2019 Health Informatics Electronic Health Record Communication. Part 1, Reference Model. Two, why interoperability is hard 29 Fig. 2.5 Structural aspects of the EHR Electronic Health Records 30. Cluster nested multi-part data structures including tables and charts. Related elements may be grouped into clusters. For example, systolic and diastolic blood pressures are separate elements, but are grouped into a cluster, e.g. 140-90, which represents one item in an entry. Element. The leaf node of the EHR hierarchy is an element, which is a single data value, such as systolic blood pressure, a drug name, or body weight. Data value. Data types, for instance, values such as codes, measurements with units, etc. Problem-oriented medical records. Larry Weed's problem-oriented medical record, POMR, was an early attempt to structure the patient record. The POMR divides the record into 2 parts. Progress notes and database. See Fig 2.6. Progress notes are organized under problems. A problem is anything that causes concern, not only a diagnosis. The problem list is a list of all the patient's problems indicating those that are active and those that have been resolved. Each progress note has a problem heading and 4 subheadings, using the acronym SOAP. S, subjective, meaning the information provided about history and symptoms by the patient or relative. O, objective, meaning information obtained by direct examination of the patient or from clinical investigations, laboratory, radiology, etc. A, assessment, meaning the clinician's assessment about what is the matter with the patient, diagnosis, prognosis, etc. P, plan, meaning the future plan of action, including investigations and treatment, drug prescriptions, physiotherapy, surgery, and so on. Drugs prescribed are also listed in a separate medication list. The database covers the patient's social, family, and past medical history. Between 1967 and 1982, WEED was funded by the U.S. government to implement a problem-oriented electronic patient record system known as PROMIS, using fast touchscreen terminals. This remarkable pioneering project was implemented for many years on medical and gynecological wards at the University of Vermont, but it was withdrawn after federal funding ceased. 13. Although not a long-term success, PROMIS was highly influential. WEED went on to develop problem knowledge couplers, PKC, which match detailed patient information with an extensive medical database to provide guidance tailored to individuals. 14. 15. 2. Why interoperability is hard. 31. The devil is in the detail. The grand vision of joined-up healthcare care is predicated on the notion that patient records will be shared electronically between clinicians across specialties. Historically, this has proven difficult, in part because every clinical specialty has its own way of thinking and working. It is hard to share information between different computer applications, even within the same specialty. Each computer application stores data in a different way. Furthermore, even within one specialty, the information is highly heterogeneous. Data collected at a routine outpatient visit differs from that for an elective surgical operation or an emergency admission. Fig 2.6 Problem-Oriented Medical Records, POMR. The devil is in the detail. 32. Much of the hard work of health interoperability and digital health in general lies in teasing out the detail of thousands of different use cases. Those who pay for IT services like to focus on high-volume transactions and pass over the specific needs of smaller specialties. Yet the common stuff is often not the most clinically valuable. It is helpful to distinguish between information that is intended to be processed by computer and what is intended to be read and
You know what? This thing is genius. I should just send a link to my girlfriend. Yeah. I was thinking I could even read other books like, AI engineering and stuff like that. But that would be a huge copyright song. But anyway, I don't care. I'm a small channel with 2 videos and no viewers. Who will watch me? All right, let's go.
understood by human users. Computer processing is best when data has to be matched, retrieved, or counted. This type of information should always be structured, complete, unambiguous, and validated. Human readers need information in a form they can understand. This should be easy to read and accompanied by supporting contextual data, such as who wrote it, when and where, and for what purpose. Humans are good at judging the significance of small discrepancies, while digital computers are unforgiving of a single unexpected bit. The following examples show that names and addresses, clinical laboratory reports, discharge summaries, and primary care records all bring their own challenges. Name and address. Apparently simple, ubiquitous concepts such as name and address have hidden complexities that create problems when they are used in multiple contexts. A person may have several names and several addresses, which they can change at will. A woman may use her maiden name in one context and her married name in another. Names are not unique. Many people may share the same name. One person may use several addresses: home, work, previous, holiday, etc., and each address is likely to be associated with different sets of people, such as family members, friends, or colleagues. The order in which names and addresses are written varies substantially between countries. An address is a label used to reference a geographical object, such as a property using identifiable real-world objects. Postal address is used for the delivery of mail. It is primarily a routing instruction leading to the property. However, most geographic objects have addresses, some of which are postal addresses, but some never receive mail. These include domestic, commercial, and industrial properties, public buildings, schools, hospitals, prisons, halls, leisure facilities, public toilets, churches and monuments, places where events take place, sports fields, parks, mountains, and lakes. For the ISO Workshop on Address Standards, considering the issues related to an international address standard, Copenhagen 2008 provides more details. http://amagic-elibrary/archives/generals ISO I080525H.pdf. 2. Why interoperability is hard. 33. Locations need to be identified and accessed for a range of purposes, which include uniquely identify people via their place of residence, identify customers and potential customers, identify where people live and work for planning public services, delivery points for goods or services, levy taxes on people and organizations, property registration and transactions. Addresses normally have a structure using a nested set of spatial units, subunit within a building or property within a street, but some rural areas do not have street names, one or more geographic areas, locality, town, county, etc., country. Part of an address is often abbreviated by a code, e.g. a postcode or area code. The definition of each level varies from country to country. Many buildings, both large and small, may have multiple addressable objects within them. Examples include bedsits with shared bathrooms and or kitchen facilities, shared houses, student and worker accommodation, residential care homes for the aged and disabled, flats with third-party access to the inside of the property for delivery purposes, flats where there is a single point of delivery for all residents, business premises with residential owners, managers, or staff, shared business properties with no particular differentiation, normally associated companies, businesses each with their own private area, but shared reception and toilet facilities, and self-contained businesses with one shared entrance. There are no clear rules about how these types of premises should be recorded, though many countries have highly regulated postal addressing systems. The life cycle of an address is a further complication. Addresses are often needed before the building itself is built. For example, temporary addresses are often allocated during the planning or construction phase of new developments. Changes to addresses can occur due to merging of two or more properties, extension, subdivision, or demolition of a property, change of property number or name, occupancy or use, and the names of areas used in the address, for example, due to administrative area reorganization. Clinical information, clinical reports. Clinical reports cover both test results and clinical letters, such as referrals and discharge summaries. The devil is in the detail. 34. Laboratory reports differ greatly according to type of laboratory. Histologists examine cells under a microscope, microbiologists cultivate colonies of bacteria, hematologists count blood cells, and clinical chemists measure the intensity of color changes when chemicals are added. The only commonality is that they all work with specimens extracted from patients. But sometimes the requester supplies the sample, sometimes the sample is taken by the laboratory, sometimes the patient is required to be present in person. There is enormous variety in the letters sent from hospitals to GPs, which are sometimes collectively referred to as discharge summaries. Consider the following. An elderly patient discharged home after recovering from a fractured femur after a fall. Mother and baby following birth. A family at the end of a course of counseling by a clinical psychologist. Initial consultation report from an ophthalmologist notifying a
Laboratory is greatly a type of laboratory. Historically, that's another. You know what? I can just rewind this. Oh.
Consider the following. An elderly patient discharged to GP. Sometimes the sample is taken by the laboratory. Sometimes the patient is required to be present in person. There is enormous variety in the letters sent from hospitals to GPs, which are sometimes collectively referred to as discharge summaries. Consider the following. An elderly patient discharged home after recovering from a fractured femur after a fall. Mother and baby following birth. A family at the end of a course of counseling by a clinical psychologist. Initial consultation report from an ophthalmologist notifying a proposed operation for cataract. Notification that a patient has been diagnosed with cancer and outlining the treatment plan. Discharge from hospital following hip replacement. In some cases, the letter refers to a single person, in others more than one. In some cases, it covers a single visit, in others multiple sessions. In many cases, the recipient is expected to do something, but not in others. It all depends on context and content. Primary care records. All primary care patients in the NHS in the UK have a lifelong medical record, which follows them when they move from one GP to another. In an ideal world, each patient's records would be sent electronically from their old practice to the new to avoid the need to re-enter information. The GP2GP Project 5 set out to do just that almost 20 years ago. At the start, the project's leaders recognized that it could be a poisoned chalice. The work was as difficult as predicted. It was one of the earliest users of HL7v3. Early versions met problems, which took years to overcome. Initially, there was a technical size limitation of 5 megabytes and 99 attachments, which excluded its use on those patients with the most complex records, about 15%. Sending practices had to print copies of all attachments, which was onerous, and it was difficult to quickly integrate records of patients who lived in more than one place, such as students, and move back and forth between practices. Each record must be checked before transmission and on receipt. 5 https digital.nhs.uk/gp2g2. Why interoperability is hard. 35. After years of effort, these problems were resolved, and it is now a contractual requirement for all GPs to use GP2GP. 2 million lifelong medical records are exchanged every year in England. Complexity creates errors. Building a single link to exchange data between two computers is relatively straightforward. Everyone sits around a table and works out what to do. This works fine for very small projects, where each person is co-located, but does not scale. The alternative is to provide rigorous implementation guidelines, but these can grow complex and voluminous. For example, the implementation guidelines for the NHS Primary Care Pathology Report Messaging 6, a successful national program which sends 50 million clinical laboratory test reports every year to GPs in England using Edifact messages, comprise almost 1 million words, about 10 times the length of this book for just 2 standard messages. The endeavor to be rigorous creates errors caused by the sheer length and complexity of the specifications. Another problem arises if domain experts, such as doctors, nurses, and managers, do not understand these specifications due to the complexity of language, or simply the time it takes to read them. Errors multiply according to the probability of misunderstanding any part of the specification. This depends on difficulty of language and terms used, as well as the level of domain and technical knowledge of participants. It is rare to find people with both adequate technical knowledge and domain knowledge. The length of specification. In a long specification, the same idea may be presented in different ways in 2 places, but each may be understood differently. If large blocks of similar but not identical information are replicated in different sections, important differences can be missed. The number of options permitted. Optionality increases the chance of error. The easiest specifications to implement are those that require precisely one instance of each item, with no optionality or multiplicity. The number of times different implementations need to be made. Each implementation on another system involves mapping or translating the specification into the local implementation language. 6test/digital.nhs.uk/services/diagnostics-service/primary care pathology report messaging. Complexity 36. All these issues lead to errors. Errors increase costs and reduce quality, create delays and hit profits and reputation. Successful specifications usually avoid errors by limiting scope, being easy to understand, relatively short and simple, with few if any options. Many problems could be avoided by more thought and preparation by those responsible for the specification. As deadlines loom, it is easy to be vague or offer the implementers a choice of options depending on the local context. This simply increases the errors and cost by pushing the problems further down the road. Users and vendors. Often, users and vendors genuinely believe that they are in full agreement until the moment when users try to use the final product. Few users fully understand what they want, let alone what other parties can or cannot provide. They seldom commit enough time or effort upfront to fully review written requirement specifications. They then won't commit to these and insist on new features after the schedule and budget have been fixed. End users are usually technically unsophisticated, do not understand the software development lifecycle, and are unable to perform the sort of scrutiny that is often required of them. To do this, users need a much higher level of education in digital health than has ever been provided in the past. Vendors are also guilty. Managers often try to shoehorn the user's requirements to fit their existing systems or patterns, thinking that it will be quicker, cheaper, and lower risk to reuse what already exists, while failing to grasp that the user really needs something else and will never be happy without it. Vendors often lack specialized domain knowledge and do not understand the user's business processes at the required level of detail to appreciate that their preferred solution will not fit. They often focus attention on the high-volume aspects of digital health, which they understand better, and cover up their lack of knowledge in the idiosyncrasies of every specialty by requiring users to check and sign off on specifications that they lack the skills to understand. Shared meaning between computers requires shared understanding between the human participants. As an analogy, consider the purchase of a new kitchen. The kitchen designer prepares a plan of the new kitchen. The plan is often illustrated using a 3D virtual model or simulation. This plan is checked, reviewed, and signed off by the customer, and this becomes the basis of the contract. The plan uses a precise technical notation, which also provides a means of communicating precisely the user's needs to the implementer, manufacturer, in a form that can be understood by both customer and manufacturer. The manufacturer only starts work after the customer has agreed the specification. The challenge in interoperability is similar but harder. It is to ensure understanding vertically between users and developers and horizontally across business and clinical processes in different locations. These issues are summarized in FHIR 2.7. 2. Why interoperability is hard. 37. Change management. One of the lessons that comes out of every study of health innovation is that change takes time and effort. If you try to implement something that is not fit for purpose, you will inevitably fail, but nor are excellent solutions guaranteed success. Understanding the social dimension and having the right culture and approach are critical. People and organizations vary in their innovativeness. A few are natural innovators, more are early adopters or early majority, next are the late majority, and finally the laggards, 18. It is hard to change what people are. Occasionally, big existential crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, show that rapid change is possible, but these are fortunately rare. FHIR 2.7. Why interoperability is hard. Change 38. Progress often comes from modest incremental changes, which accumulate over time to deliver large gains over the long, not short, term. Change is driven by a combination of technical, policy, economic, clinical, or managerial factors, often working together on different actors and at different levels within organizations. 19. Common factors include technology developments, such as Wi-Fi and mobile technologies, the culture of how clinicians and managers work together, and detailed design of patient-centered pathways to give better outcomes at lower cost. Data sharing, including appropriate performance metrics, enables feedback, benchmarking, and comparisons of performance and variation. Frontline support enables change, such as quality improvement, education and training, and dissemination of best practice. Financial carrots and sticks incentivize and focus on the need for change. Cotter has identified 8 common errors and has proposed remedies for managing innovation and change. Table 2.1.20. Behavior change. Most digital projects start with a chief executive or politician wanting to make a change top-down. This is one of the problems. All change requires people to change their behavior, so we need to think bottom-up about why and how people change their behavior. Susan Mischie's Behavior Change Wheel, BCW, helps us understand how we can successfully introduce changes in behavior and culture at the level of individuals, communities. And Table 2.1, Errors and Remedies in Management of Change. Common errors. Proposed remedy. 1. Not establish a great enough sense of urgency.
Wait, what is this? They just mentioned this, but they never do anything about that. Mm, no. Are they able to do it? Just calling my friend to see if he's free or not. Um, okay.
Establish a sense of urgency that something really has to be done. It even helps to have a crisis. 2. Fail to create a sufficiently powerful guiding coalition. Form a powerful guiding coalition of key stakeholders with position power, expertise, credibility, and leadership. 3. Underestimate the power of vision. Create a vision and strategy that is desirable, feasible, focused, flexible, and can be communicated in less than 5 min. 4. Undercommunicate the vision by a factor of 10, or 100, or even 1,000. Communicate the change vision simply using examples. This needs to be repeated over again in multiple forums. Address apparent inconsistencies. Listen and be listened to. 5. Permit obstacles to block the new vision. Empower employees to modify structures and systems to bring about the changes required. Changes will be needed in process, workflow, and information systems. 6. Fail to create short-term wins. Generate short-term wins that are visible, clearly related to the change effort, and build momentum. 7. Declare victory too soon. Consolidate gains, reduce interdependencies, and produce more change. 8. Neglect to anchor changes firmly in the corporate culture. Anchor new approaches in the culture. This comes last, not first, to why interoperability is hard 13 populations. It incorporates 3 valuable ideas: the COM-B model of behavior change techniques, BCT, and APEACE evaluation criteria. COM-B, quoting U.S. criminal law, she says that to prove someone is guilty of a crime, you have to demonstrate the means or capability, opportunity, and motive. Motivation, opportunity, and capability, along with behavior itself, are the 4 components of the COM-B model. Capability. There must be the capability to do it. Capability includes both our psychological and physical capacity to engage in an activity, including the necessary knowledge, skills, and tools. Opportunity. There must be the opportunity for the behavior to occur. Opportunity includes everything that makes the behavior possible or prompts it. Opportunity has social and physical aspects. If you're carrying a tablet, you have the physical opportunity to use, although using it may not be socially acceptable at a dinner party. Motivation. There must be sufficiently strong motivation. They must be more highly motivated to do the behavior than to do something else. Motivation includes both unconscious habits and conscious thoughts and goals. These relate closely to fast automatic thinking, System 1, and slow reflective thinking, System 2, which work in very different ways, 22. Capability and opportunity also influence motivation. Behavior change is what we are seeking. Capability, opportunity, and motivation each influence behavior and are influenced by behavior in turn. To change behavior, you need to be clear about what behavior you want and the context in which that can be achieved. Then think about what needs to change to achieve that. For one type of behavior change, it may be most appropriate to remove a barrier by improving some aspect of capability, while for another, it may be best to deter by restricting an opportunity. Almost 100 behavioral change techniques, BCTs, have been identified. 23. These include goals and planning, feedback and monitoring, social support, shaping knowledge, natural consequences, comparison of behavior, associations, repetition and substitution, comparison of outcomes, reward and threat, regulation, antecedents, identity, scheduled consequences, self-belief, and covert learning. The AP's criteria provide a reminder that all changes take place within a social context, and that evidence of effectiveness is only one consideration. The AP's criteria are affordability, practicality, effectiveness, and cost-effectiveness, acceptability, safety, side effects, and equity. The 3 laws of interoperability. The following laws of interoperability have stood the test of time. 1. Interoperability. It's all about the people. Change 42. Complexity. You can move it around or externalize it, but you can't make it go away. 3. Healthcare software. Cheap, flexible, interoperable. You can have any 2. These were first stated in 2011-24 and expanded in subsequent blog entries. References 1. Palfrey J. Gasser U. Interop. The Promise and Perils of Highly Interconnected Systems. New York, Basic Books, 2012. 2. HIMSS. Dictionary of Healthcare Information Technology Terms. HIMSS, Acronyms and Organizations, 2006. 3. Standard Computer Dictionary, a compilation of IEEE Standard Computer Glossaries. New York, NY, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, 1990. 4. Gibbons P. et al., Coming to Terms, Scoping Interoperability in Healthcare. Final, HL7 EHR Interoperability Workgroup, 2007. ht-hln.com/assets PDFs, Coming to Terms, February 2007.pdf. 5. Shannon C., A Mathematical Theory of Communication. Belsys Tech J, 1946, 27, 379-423, 620-56. 6. Dolan R. Altshuler L., Approaching Semantic Interoperability in Health Level 7. JAMIA, 2011, 1899-103. 7. Grieve G. Clinical Interoperability in FHIR. Dynamic Health IT 2015. /dynamicshield-t.blogspot.com. 2512-01 archive L. 8. And Hardin G. The Tragedy of the Commons. Science. 1968, 3859, 1243-8. 9. Jiangsu H. Harrison O.T. et al. Interoperability in NHS hospitals must be improved. The Care Quality Commission should be a key actor in this process. J. Roysock Med. 2020, 113.3, 101-4. 10. Rector A. Nowlin W. K.S. Foundations for an Electronic Medical Record. Methinf Med. 1991, 30, 179-86. 11. Martinez Costa C. Menarguez Tortosa M. Fernandez Brace J.T. An Approach for the Semantic Interoperability of ISO EN 13606 and Open EHR Archetypes. J. Biomed Inform. 2010, 43.5, 736-46. 12. Weedell, Medical Records That Guide and Teach. Any in Gold. Springer. Form. 1998, 48-1, 1. Better Value 6. 42. Taxonomy. 46.com.au. Interoperable Terminology. Medical Language Background. When? http://nature Switzerland AG 2021. T. Benson, G. Grieve, Principles of Health Interoperability, Health Information Technology Standards, http://doi.org/10178978356883. 3. Clinical Terminology, Medical Language Background. When, in the 15th century, Gutenberg's invention of the movable type led to the mass production and dissemination of books and written information, language was still relatively unformalized. It took until the 18th century before the great dictionaries and nomenclatures, such as Dr. Johnson's English Dictionary and Linnaeus's Biological Taxonomy, were produced. The representation of written information has become more and more specific over the centuries. The first way of representing information was by a picture or drawing, such as in Stone Age cave paintings. The earliest writing was based on pictograms, such as Egyptian hieroglyphics and Chinese characters, but the need for cheap and quick writing materials led to the development of cruciform characters on wet clay blocks in Mesopotamia, and later the development of phonetic alphabets, such as those of Greece and Rome. Modern English does everything using just 26 letters, 10 digits, and a few punctuation marks. Computers are even more economical. They hold and process information digitally as sequences of binary bits, 0s and 1s, and work by matching strings. But this needs precisely coded data. A computer can instantly check if 2 strings are the same, but if a difference is detected, it cannot judge whether or not that difference is important. In spite of decades of effort, we do not yet have computers that cope very well with the ambiguity inherent in natural language. The complex structure of human languages has spurred many people to try to invent a better one, but these have invariably failed to meet their inventors' hopes of universal adoption. However, health interoperability depends on having an agreed specialist language, complete with semantics and syntax. It is faced with 42 and needs to overcome all of the issues that have created barriers for other invented languages. Sciences such as biology and chemistry have an internationally agreed formal structure for their terminology. Every living organism has a generic and specific Latin name expressed within a comprehensive biological taxonomy, which in many ways anticipated the full understanding of the evolution of life. Chemical structures are expressed in internationally standardized ways. Medical terms. Medical and more broadly clinical terminology escaped formalization, leading to problems of ambiguity that are a significant risk to patient safety. The lack of agreed terminology has been a recognized issue for at least 250 years. There is even an old word, nosology, to describe the development of medical terminology, but the need has increased with the use of computers. Today, nosologists call themselves clinical terminologists. The historical, eclectic, and ad hoc origins of medical terminology have encumbered anyone interested in healthcare with the need to learn a whole new language, replete with homonyms, where the same term means different things depending on context, synonyms, where there is more than one term for exactly the same concept, eponyms named after people, 3-letter acronyms, and abbreviations. Medical students need to learn even more new words than people who study languages at university level. Nobody who has not learned the eponym can guess the meaning of Hodgkin's, lymph node cancer, Bright's, kidney disease, or von Recklinghausen's disease, hereditary neurofibromatosis. Information scientists classify knowledge in a series of levels. For example, the Dewey Decimal Classification, used in libraries, organizes knowledge into 10 main classes. 000, computer science, information, and general works. 100, philosophy and psychology. 200, religion. 300, social sciences. 400, language. 500, science, including mathematics. 600, technology and applied science. 700, arts and recreation. 800, literature. 900, history, geography, and biography. Bloy, in his seminal book, Information in Medicine, showed how healthcare is unique among scientific endeavors because day-to-day medical information relates to so many different levels. The scope of healthcare covers an exceptional 3, clinical terminology 43 breadth, ranging from the very small to the very large, from radiation and subatomic structures, complex molecules including DNA and proteins, cells including hematology and cancers, microorganisms such as bacteria and viruses, anatomical structures including the different body systems, mental activity, the whole person, groups, through to societies and international populations. Every aspect of healthcare mixes multiple overlapping theories, each with their own subterminology. Any classification system is just one way of slicing up a complex reality, made more difficult because key medical concepts such as diseases and diagnoses are abstractions, defined using information from a variety of information levels. Diseases are not things that can be seen or touched. People use terms in the way that they and their immediate colleagues understand. Each user of a term assumes that everyone else understands just what he or she intends it to mean. Over time, groups develop their own local dialect. Staff in medical records departments can often identify not only a doctor's specialty, but also the institution where he or she was trained from the way they use certain terms. Lewis Carroll illustrates the problem in an exchange between Alice and Humpty Dumpty in Through the Looking Glass. 3. I don't know what you mean by glory, Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant, there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I chose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master, that's all. Coding and classification. Often people confuse the terms coding and classification and use them almost synonymously. This may be because the classification process involves recording the codes used to name specific classes. However, coding schemes and classifications do completely different jobs. Classification allocates things into groups or classes, while coding is the allocation of identifiers, which can apply to anything, including classes and classifications. Coding, a code is a sequence of symbols, usually digits or letters, which designates an object or concept for identification or selection purposes. It is just an alternative name for something, an identifier, designed for computer processing. Coding systems are an essential part of healthcare computer applications and interoperability specifications for exchanging data between computers. Coding and classification 44. The primary challenge for coding scheme designers is to produce something that will be widely and willingly adopted and endorsed by clinicians and managers. However, clinicians and managers have no more interest in codes than a retail customer has in the barcode on a packet of cornflakes. Codes are needed and used by computers, not humans. The secret is to hide the codes. Clinicians record information in the form, language, and detail that helps them most when treating individual patients. Clinical records require precise and comprehensive detail about each individual patient, which creates a tension with statistical analysis that requires patients to be classified into a manageable number of discrete and mutually exclusive groups for counting and analysis. On the other hand, clinicians and managers do need to be interested in classification because statistical analysis is the basis of all quantitative management, accountancy, and research. Classification. Classification is the systematic placement of things or concepts into categories or classes which share some common attribute, quality, or property. There is no limit to the number of ways that any set of objects can be classified, and so no possibility of a perfect classification that is good for everything. The choice of what classification system to use is frequently determined by payment agencies, insurance companies, and national governments, which control whether a doctor or institution gets paid. Such bodies usually specify the classification system they require, often in collaboration with representatives from the professional and trade associations, medical colleges, and educational bodies. Once chosen, it must be accepted by users and implemented in computer software. In the Endangered Medical Record, Slee argues that the choice of scheme used for electronic patient records may represent a threat to the truthfulness and completeness of medical record content. By using of broad categories, such as those specified by the International Classification of Diseases, ICD, not precise terms, we throw away detail that should be preserved permanently. His plea is for detailed, permanent, and unambiguous codes. 4. For example, a trauma surgeon might describe a skiing accident as a closed spiral fracture of the shaft of the right tibia with fractured fibula. In ICD-10, the code for fracture of shaft of tibia has the following hierarchical structure. Chapter 19. Injury, poisoning, and certain other consequences of external cause, S00-T98. Block injuries to the knee and lower leg, S80-S98. S82, fracture of lower leg including ankle. S82.2, fracture of shaft of tibia, with or without mention of fracture of fibula. S82.2.1, closed fracture of shaft of tibia. 3, clinical terminology 45. The selected ICD-10 code, S82.21, fails to say whether the leg is left or right, whether the fracture is simple, spiral, or compound, or if the fibula is involved. Hierarchy. A hierarchy is an ordered organization of concepts. General concepts are at the top of the hierarchy. At each level down the hierarchy, concepts are increasingly specialized. This can be thought of as an inverted tree with its root at the top. For example, biological classification places animals and plants into a hierarchical classification, a taxonomy, according to similarities in structure, origin, etc., which indicate a common relationship. The levels in the biological taxonomy include kingdom, phylum, animals or division, plants, class, order, family, genus, and species. Position-dependent codes. Healthcare computer systems use nationally prescribed coding systems. Many of these, such as the ICD-10, CPT-4, and READ codes, use a position-dependent hierarchical coding structure. The internal structure of the code specifies its meaning relative to other codes. The code structure increases in detail from left to right, with the first character of the code specifying the chapter, the second the main subdivision, and so on down the branches of the tree until the final leaf codes are reached. A significant problem of position-dependent hierarchical coding systems is that they cannot be modified without changing the meaning of codes in different versions. When this happens, one version must be replaced by another, creating a new set of problems. Definitions. Coding and classification have their own terminology, Fig 3.1. This is introduced in this chapter, and these terms are used throughout this book. Code. Each code is part of a coding scheme. A coding scheme defines a set of codes which are unique within the namespace of the coding scheme and globally unique when coupled with the name of the coding scheme itself. Concept. Concepts are abstract ideas or general notions that occur in the mind, in speech, or in thought. They are the fundamental building blocks of thoughts and beliefs. Each concept is identified by a concept code. Display term. This is a human-readable term. In some cases, more than one display term may be provided for the same concept to cover true synonyms, including translations into different languages. In such cases, one display term is usually designated as the preferred term, which is the default meaning of a code. Coding and classification 46 patient as whole major patient part abdomen cardiovascular heart bone marrow organ part tortoise cell lymphocyte nucleus cell part macromolecule micromolecule atom sorions enzyme glucose sodium ion physiologic system levels of medical descriptions definitions clinical terminology code concept display term expression identifier interface terminology ontology position dependent coding scheme reference terminology relationship terminology value set vocabulary content concept orientation concept permanence non-semantic concept identifiers polyhierarchy formal definitions reject and elsewhere classified multiple granularities multiple consistent views context representation graceful evolution recognize redundancy payment hundreds of classes audit and research thousands of classes individual patient care, tens of thousands. All of medicine, hundreds of
guys,
thousands.
it's snowing
Uses
outside.
desiderata fig. 3.1 scope.
It's snowing outside. Okay.
And terms used in clinical terminology. 3. Clinical terminology 47 expression. An expression is a collection of references to one or more concepts used to express an instance of a clinical idea. An expression containing a single concept identifier is referred to as a pre-coordinated expression. An expression containing two or more concept identifiers is a post-coordinated expression. Identifier computer systems use unique identifiers for people, things, and places, which have similar properties to codes. One way of achieving uniqueness is to treat each identifier as a pair, comprising a unique name for the assigner, plus a value for the identifier, which is unique within assigner. It is the responsibility of the assigner to ensure that values are unique. Interface terminology. Interface terminology describes systematic collections of clinically terms that support clinicians' entry of patient information directly into computer programs, such as clinical documentation systems or decision support tools. They may mediate between a user's colloquial conceptualizations of concept descriptions and an underlying reference terminology. Ontology. Ontology is hierarchical structuring of knowledge about things by subcategorizing them as a set of concepts within a domain according to their essential qualities and relationships between those concepts. Position-dependent coding scheme, a coding scheme in which the hierarchy is represented directly in the codes used. The internal structure of the code specifies the meaning relative to other codes. The structure of the code increases in detail from left to right. Reference terminology, a terminology in which every concept designation has a formal, machine-usable definition supporting data aggregation and retrieval. Reference terminologies are designed to provide exact and complete representations of a given domain's knowledge, including its entities and ideas, and their interrelationships. They are typically optimized to support the storage, retrieval, and classification of clinical data. Relationship concepts may be related to other concepts via relationships, which allow the generation of hierarchical structures. One concept may be part of more than one hierarchical structure. Often these relationships are defined as part of the coding scheme, but other relationships are also possible. Coding and classification 48 terminology. A set of concepts designated by terms belonging to a special domain of knowledge, or subject field. Value set. A set of values that are allowed for a particular data item. A value set may define a subset of a coding scheme. Message specifications refer to value sets as the allowed values for a field. Codes from a single coding scheme may be referenced using a value set table, which has a heading and may include metadata such as value set name, unique identifier, coding scheme, author, time validity, version.
Damn, I never knew the problem that FHIR was trying to solve is so complicated. I'm trying to think, okay, what would I do to solve it? Oh, I would create a standardized set of codes and, publish it. But then I see someone already did that and I can see how complicated it can be. So,
And other
let's
notes.
see.
Each entry in the table contains concept code value, display term, and notes about applicability. User requirements. A design requirement for any coding and classification system is to satisfy the needs of the different stakeholders. Roger Cote, the father of SNOMED, views this as a pyramid with 3 levels of use. 1. At the tip, case mix classifications such
See, no one says what is Nomad. Let me Google it. Nomad. Book. Book. Systemized non-medical clinical terms. Oh. So someone already created it and called it Snowmed. Wow. Wow. Snowmed. All right. Let's continue.
Of DRGs used for payment. 2. In the middle, classifications of diagnoses and procedures used to monitor and audit clinical activities. 3. At the base, clinical terminology used for individual patient care. Healthcare managers and researchers need classified data to enable comparisons and data exchange with existing data sources. Links between classifications must be explicit with one-to-one or many-to-one links. A many-to-one link involves loss of information, the extent of which is determined by how closely one classification is based on the other. A multi-level classification with both coarse and fine granularity may allow two-way mapping from another classification. High levels of compatibility can usually be obtained only by basing a new classification directly on the target, using the same class boundaries. This requirement for cross-mapping with existing classifications drives the developers of clinical classifications to build on existing schemes, even if they are not suitable for the need in hand. For example, the ICD is organized around body systems, which is helpful in some circumstances, but not in others. Early versions of SNOMED reflected its origins in the College of American Pathologists as an extension of the Systematized Nomenclature of Pathology, SNOPE, giving a pathological slant. Doctors and nurses will not take the trouble to learn how to use any system unless it is quick and easy to use and provides information in the form and language that best helps them treat individual patients. Automatic or semi-automatic encoding software is needed. Clinical records need to be as specific as possible. Hence, clinicians require a comprehensive nomenclature of medical terms covering everything that could occur within any patient's medical record. That is, all of clinical medicine and health service administration, but not the whole of biomedical science. 3. Clinical Terminology 49. In 1984, the IMIA Working Conference on Clinical Terminology concluded that in future healthcare information systems, the user interface should be based upon natural language. The generation of numerical or alphanumeric codes should occur within the computer. Automatic encoding of natural language should be used. The morbidity and mortality statistical classification requirements of national and international groups should be the byproduct of medically based healthcare information systems. 6. It was not anticipated that almost 40 years later, most clinical coding in hospitals would still be done by coding clerks. Electronic information systems operate at two different levels, which Rector has described as the model of use and the model of meaning. Both are important. Model of use. The model of use describes how data is captured and displayed when a system such as an EHR is used in practice. The model of use represents the human interface. The same data might be captured in any number of different ways, and the skill of the designer is to make this as easy and efficient as possible for each work process. Different use cases have different models of use, figure 3.2. The model of use needs to make data capture for each activity as quick and easy as possible. Healthcare workflow comprises both high-volume activities, such as requesting tests, prescribing medication, and making referrals, and lower-volume activities, which are specific to the clinical specialty, patients' problems, and progress along the care pathway. The specifics of patient assessment, diagnosis, monitoring, and planning treatment, tests, and follow-up differ considerably according to both specialty and what is the matter with the patient. The two main methods of recording data for reuse are ad hoc data entry and structured data entry. Ad hoc data entry. Ad hoc data entry is one method of data coding. The user simply types in the first few letters of the term in mind, and the system responds with a list of matching terms and synonyms. These terms are often organized hierarchically in a tree structure. The user can scan up and down the hierarchy, moving between levels of greater or lesser detail to find the term they seek. The term selected is shown, providing the user with an opportunity to validate the choice. This method has been used by most GPs in the UK for over 30 years, although the completeness and consistency of data captured in this way are problematic. 8. The practicality of ad hoc data entry depends on keeping the size of the list of matching terms to a size that can be scanned quickly and easily. The human eye can read up to 6 lines of text of about 15 characters without moving the eye muscles. Anything more takes longer to read and increases errors. User requirements 50 model of use data capture work processes, common processes, requesting, prescribing, referring, immunizations, assessment, findings, diagnosis, treatment tests, planning, follow-up, code plus value, horses for courses, codes, tag, text, quick and easy forms, single concept matching, text parsing, whose subject, author, where, when, criteria, direct patient care, rapid response, clear rendering, integration with data capture, chronological summary, problem-oriented, author-focused, data display, views into record, notes type event problem, medication procedures history, findings, plans, demographics, graphical and tabular reminders and alerts, clinical decision support, clinically intuitive facilitate work process, criteria methods, capture context, specialty specific fig. 3.2 Model of Use. 3. Clinical Terminology 51. The number of options displayed may be limited. Limit by providing specific value sets for each task to restrict the number of options available, or by displaying the most commonly used items first. Velocity coding. Structured data entry. Structured data entry removes the requirement to type in the first few letters of the term. The user simply points and picks with a mouse or on a touchscreen. This works well when the task has a narrow scope and clearly defined path, e.g., a questionnaire. However, the designer needs to structure each step to fit in with each user's way of working. This is more difficult when working with patients with multiple conditions. The protocol must follow the natural clinical order of the task and how the user works. Items on picking lists must be grouped in a natural order and use appropriate terms. In addition, each item needs to be recorded in a form suitable for information retrieval, which is often different from that used in the protocol. Data collection must also be integrated with the display. Review of previous records and clinical decision support warnings and alerts. At any single moment, the user's screen can only show a small amount of information, although a patient's EHR can contain thousands of information items. One approach is to offer multiple views into the record with instant switching between views. Multiple views. Such views into an EHR include chronological. The most natural way to display information is in date-time accession order. Reverse chronological order shows the most recent first. Data may be grouped by the clinically relevant date, not just the date it was generated, so laboratory tests should be linked both to the date of sample and to the report date. Author view.
57. Oh my god. Okay, let's take a break, guys. I'm trying to just find the book. God damn, who wrote this book, man? The research is crazy. This is the most boring Springer type book cover, you know that? Anyway, let's watch something interesting.
I'm going to repeat this just for the sake of the broadcast. So we're
when you do get a picture in your imagination of who you prefer to be, what you prefer to be doing, where you prefer to be doing it, how you prefer to be doing it, when you see that, all you really have to do is mimic it, mirror it, act it out as best as you can on all levels of your life. All you have to do is be like that person in your mind's eye. Do things the way he or she would do it. And then when you start doing things the way he or she would do it, you will change your vibration to the vibration that is representative of that life. And when you shift your vibration to the representation of that life, you will start to synchronistically have that life. All the things that are representative of what that you would have will come in. So that's how to use your imagination as an actual tool, an actual application tool. When you do get a picture in your imagination of who you prefer to be, what you prefer to be doing, where you prefer to be doing it, how you prefer to be doing it, when you see that, all you really have to do is mimic it, mirror it, act it out as best as you can on all levels of your life. All you have to do is be like that person in your mind's eye. Do things the way he or she would do it. And then when you start doing things the way he or she would do it, you will change your vibration to the vibration that is representative of that life. And when you shift your vibration to the representation of that life, you will start to synchronistically have that life. All the things that are representative of what that you would have will come in. So that's how to use your imagination as an actual tool, an actual application tool. When you do get a picture in your imagination of who you prefer to be, what you prefer to be.
$10,000? Are you kidding me?
That's what I told you.
Oh my God. Yeah, I've got some old jewelry.
When you do.
Let's see, how expensive a solo dinner at a restaurant?
Cutting deck joists all alone.
Hello?
Hello, Tom.
Yes.
Maybe I should have like a soft ambient music and then listen to it. There's something very magical about living in a world like that. There's so much snow, guys. I don't know if I can show you all. It's all the snow. It's like so good. My God, what nice. Okay.
so that users can see quickly the last entries that they or another person made for this patient. Clinical documents such as discharge and referral letters, care events such as admissions, discharges, and clinic visits. Ankar's problem list including diagnoses and allergies, including whether or not a problem is still active. Medication, distinguishing between present, previous, and proposed medication. Operations and major procedures. Clinical progress notes. These may be ordered chronologically within problems and structured using SOAP. History including presenting history, advanced directives, consents, mental capacity, family and social history. Findings, with sections for examination findings, laboratory results, vital signs, and imaging findings. Flowcharts and graphs can be provided for specific types of data, which need to be monitored, and such as blood pressure, blood chemistry, and outcome assessments. Plans indicating who is to do what and when. User requirements 52. Demographics. Model of meaning. To make it computable, each model of use needs to be convertible into a model of meaning. The model of meaning is a representation for reporting and statistical analysis purposes, which represents our understanding of the world, so that we can reason about it in general and about individual patients. Computers are limited in their ability to process data and require information in a common, standardized format. The model of meaning provides a structure for data processing and reasoning. There is a great advantage for reporting and clinical decision support in working with a common model of meaning. This is a key ratio nail for the development of reference models, such as the HL7 RIM, the ISO 13606 reference model, and FHIR resources, see Fig 3.3. The HL7 Term Info Project provided a set of recommendations on how to bind SNOMED with HL7 and expresses this requirement as follows. Every application has its own data entry screens, workflow, internal database design, and other nuances. And yet, despite this, we talk of semantic interoperability. In order to achieve interoperability and enable a receiver to aggregate data coming from any of a number of applications, it must be possible to compare data generated on any of these applications. In order to compare data, it helps to imagine a canonical or normal form. If all data, regardless of how it was captured, can be converted into a common form, it becomes possible to compare 10. This applies not only when we wish to exchange data between applications, semantic interoperability, but also within EHR systems, where a single system is used to support different models of use, semantic operability. Some suppliers have chosen to use a standard reference model as the basis of their application's architecture. The use of the HL7 RIM for this purpose has been termed RIM-BA, RIM-Based Application Architecture 11. FHIR resources, ISO 13606, and OpenEHR reference models are also used in this way. Many also use proprietary architectures, with or without a direct mapping to standardized reference models. For storage and analysis, we need information to be in a form that allows it to be reused in a wide range of different ways. The ideal way to do this is to store the data in a form that reflects the model of meaning, rather than that of the model of use. The storage system needs to keep information safe and secure, but the value of any system depends on what you can get out of it. The primary purpose is to enable questions to be answered accurately and efficiently. Accurate reports are precise and complete. Efficient reports are quick and timely. Users need to be able to count and extract groups of patient record data for innumerable reasons. The process of specifying a report involves 3 Clinical Terminology 53, selection and exclusion criteria to identify the records required and what codes to search for, the sort order in which to display the results, the content and format of each record displayed. Common representation virtual view of information independent of model of use, consistent metadata and contextual information, allow general questions to be asked of specific data. Common reference information model HL7v3 IMN 13606, patient clinician able to answer questions, organization time period population, storage accurate efficient models of meanings, precision completeness ease effort skills, frequency rapidity speed, secure and safe communication reporting file printer screen destination summary data. Display content sort order patient chronological selection and exclusion criteria, communications mappable to a common model of meaning, selective retrieval on both sender and receiver, FIG. 3.3 Model of meaning. User requirements 54. The summary data at the top and bottom of the report, headings, totals, percentages. Where to send the report, screen, printer, or file. Data retrieval is hard if the underlying structure of the data is not the way that the user thinks it is. Yet this is frequently the case. If the database is organized using a common model of meaning, then this model needs to be understood by everyone who wants to interrogate the data, which requires documentation, education, and training. A second requirement is that users become familiar with the layout of their own data collection screens and picking lists, and think of this as the way the system works. For example, they reasonably expect to use familiar lists and groups for their reports. The ability to report data in the way it is structured on data collection screens is a basic requirement. However, this may be hard to deliver if the data is stored using a model of meaning, when this differs considerably from the model of use. System designers may need to go to some trouble to resolve this issue. Another difficulty is the need for multidimensional analysis. A trauma surgeon may want to know, how many fractured shafts of femur did I see last year? How many open reductions and fixations did I perform on any bone? How many times did I use a locked intramedullary nail? A code with a meaning such as open reduction and fixation of fracture of the shaft of femur using a locked intramedullary nail may appear at first sight to allow these questions to be answered. But, in practice, it is hard to answer these questions using similar terms. This is the reason why multi-axial coding systems such as SNOMED have been developed, but they have to be implemented properly in electronic patient record systems to meet this requirement. A practical difference between the model of use and the model of meaning is that the former is usually context-specific, while the latter aims to be universally true. At the point of care, the context is implicitly understood, while for big data analytics, the information needs to be unambiguously explicit. Desiderata. Desiderata for controlled medical vocabularies in the 21st century. Brought together a number of common requirements for clinical terminologies which had been developed in international terminology projects such as GALEN, 13, UMLS, Unified Medical Language System, 14, SNOMED, RT, Reference Terminology, 15, and the NHS Clinical Terms Project, 16. These requirements were highly influential in the design of SNOMED CT. They are vocabulary content. Content is paramount in terms of scope and quality. Any practical clinical terminology needs to be comprehensive in domain coverage, concepts, and having human-readable terms, descriptions, and synonyms. A means is required to allow the 3 Clinical Terminology 55 content to be expanded as and when required, including translation into other languages and dialects, while ensuring quality. Concept orientation. Each concept term should have one and only one meaning. It should be neither vague nor ambiguous. However, each concept may be described by several terms, synonyms, in the same language, as well as different terms in other languages and dialects. Note that the same term can have different meanings, homonyms, that relate to different concepts. Concept permanence. Once a concept is created, its meaning persists. It must not be changed or deleted by updates. However, a concept may be marked as retired, where its meaning is found to be ambiguous, redundant, or otherwise incorrect. Non-semantic concept identifiers. Each concept should have a unique identifier, which should be meaningless. Semantic information relating to meaning is an attribute of the concept, not part of its identifier. This is a problem with many traditional position-dependent coding schemes, such as ICD. Note that this desideratum is controversial. It may not always be appropriate for aspects of meaning to be part of the code, but it is not always wrong either. Polyhierarchy. It is useful to organize medical concepts in a hierarchical way, but many clinical concepts are naturally multidimensional, with more than one parent, supertype concept. For example, a fractured tibia is both a type of fracture and a type of leg injury. Formal definitions. The way of classifying a concept should be independent of the way of identifying it. Use of descriptive logic to define and classify clinical concepts is a development away from the traditional position-dependent coding schemes and dictionary forms of definition. For example, pneumococcal pneumonia may be defined using a hierarchical is a linked to the concept pneumonia and a caused by linked to the concept Streptococcus pneumoniae. Reject not elsewhere classified. Many existing classifications include catch-all categories for concepts not covered explicitly. Not elsewhere classified, NEC categories change their meaning when any new category is added within the NEC scope. The meaning is not permanent, criterion 3 above. User requirements, 56 multiple granularities. Users require different levels of granularity for defining concepts, navigation, decision support, and reporting. For example, a manager may only need to know that a patient has a broken leg. The finance department that it is a fractured tibia, but the clinician needs to know that it is a closed spiral fracture of the shaft of the right tibia. There should be no arbitrary limitation on the number of levels in the hierarchy. Multiple consistent views. When a concept has multiple parents in a hierarchy, the view of that concept should not depend on how it was reached. The full structure of a terminology, including all hierarchies and relationships, can be complex, but each end user only needs views into it that reflect his or her own needs and understanding. This must remain consistent with the underlying model. Context representation information recorded within a particular context should not be interpreted without that understanding. The context needs to be computer processable. One approach is to provide a means of recording context explicitly within the terminology. Graceful evolution terminologies evolve and change over time. It creates problems for users if the meanings of aggregated time series data change in an uncontrolled manner. Care is needed to design the whole structure to support graceful evolution of concepts, terms, and relationships. Recognize redundancy. When terminologies change, some components will become redundant, and so it's important to recognize explicitly that this has happened. These principles have stood the test of time well. Any proposal that does not meet them will inevitably cause problems sooner or later, probably sooner. The chocolate teapot, a fictitious example. The fictional story of the chocolate teapot developed by Dr. Malcolm Duncan illustrates a number of the issues involved in classification and terminology that illustrate the importance of these principles. 1. We are grateful for his permission to reproduce this in an edited form. The aim of this example is to illustrate some of the pitfalls in using terminologies and to introduce some other terms that are used in describing them. This chapter has introduced some complicated ideas, and the aim of this story is to help explain these further. 1. htpulse.muckertablet.demon.co.uk/chocolate-teapot-light.htm3. Clinical terminology 57. Not all readers will be confident they know, for example, what asthma really is, even doctors disagree, so this discussion is organized around the classification of teapots. Most people think they know what a teapot is. Starting simple. Consider a fragment of a simple but functional crockery classification that exists solely to document the appearance of table settings as described in Victorian literature. Classification of tableware, version 9, CTV 9, 1875. Crockery, teapot, brown teapot, white teapot, blue teapot. Teapot, color not elsewhere classified. Teapot, color not otherwise specified, NOS. Users are obliged to code to the leaf the maximum level of detail, which is how ICD-10 is used. Only brown, white, and blue crockery were fashionable in 1875. The uncouth might deploy other colors, NEC, or worse, might not care, NOS. However, it is axiomatic that your teapot is made from earthenware, ideally from quality porcelain. Elsewhere, there is the frequently updated systematized nomenclature of kitchen terminology, S&NO-kitch, intended to support all catering applications. A fragment of this terminology is followed through a number of iterations. Snow-kitch release N crockery teapot. Teapot has no children and could be equivalent to any of the 5 classification leaves CTV9. Basic evolution. People then ask for further concepts to be added, leading to the next release. Snow-kitch release N+1 crockery teapot, brown teapot, white teapot. Anyone wanting to specify a brown or white teapot using Snow-kitch can now do so. Coding to leaf is not mandatory, and so no S and NEC are absent. The chocolate teapot 58 concept in Snow-kitch is the equivalent of both teapot, color, NEC, and teapot, color, NOS categories in CTV9, although in effect, the meaning of teapot in this version of Snow-kitch is skewed to mean a teapot that is neither brown nor white. Snowkitch Release N+2 Crockery Teapot, Brown Teapot, White Teapot, Blue Teapot, China Teapot. In Release N+2 Blue Teapot, forgotten in the previous version, is added as a child. This further alters the meaning of the concept teapot in its role as teapot, color not elsewhere classified. Complications arise. Also, a China Teapot child has been added, but this is not a discrete sibling. It could be any color. Teapot now has non-disjoint subclasses. China Teapot has perhaps acquired part of the meaning of teapot, color, NEC, from teapot, i.e. China teapots, which are not brown, white, or blue. However, when users interested in whether a teapot is China receive a white teapot code, they are out of luck. All they can infer is that it represents a teapot. As both the material and color are important, new concepts white China teapot and blue China teapot are added in the next release. Unfortunately, we cannot rely on everyone using them, because they don't have to code to leaf. Some people may only choose to specify whether their teapots are China and not capture color at all. However, we still have a common understanding of the meaning of the parent teapot concept as superclass of its children. Concepts added in the next release will overturn this. Snowkitch Release N+3 Crockery Teapot, Brown Teapot, White China Teapot, Blue Teapot, Blue China Teapot, White China Teapot, Blue China Teapot, Chocolate Teapot, Ornamental Teapot. Industrial Teapot. 3 Clinical Terminology 59. The addition of chocolate, ornamental, and industrial teapots means that ontological continuity with previous versions are deeply in question. Industrial teapot indicates where it is used, but nothing else except presumably that it is not ornamental or made of chocolate. Teapots made from metal or chocolate are not earthenware, and hence not crockery. From release to release, there is little consistency in what we can infer about color, material, or use. Errors are found. Worse, the arrival of certain children has even altered the meaning we can infer from the unadorned teapot parent concept. For example, the Kansas Tea Company, KTC, operate decision support software designed against Release N+2. If concept equals teapot or child of teapot, safe to add tea leaves plus boiling water. And if KTC had never anticipated confectionery in this hierarchy. As for ornamental teapot, who knows if it can be used to make tea? KTC must now add multiple additional nodes to their decision support rule and be able to exclude subtypes. For example, it would not be wise to add boiling water to a chocolate teapot. The validity of these relationships depends on your interest in teapots. There is no longer a universal understanding of the concept. There is merely a shared assumption about the term now exposed as not applying in all contexts of use. If we had started with a clear definition of teapot as a free text scope note, this might have been avoided. Most people can express the teapot that is in their head most of the time, but this may be at the expense of loss of predictable machine readability. Subsets are developed. The Comestible Supply Consortium recognizes the incoherent use of the Snowkitch terminology across their systems and mandates use of a small subset: teapot, brown teapot, white teapot, blue teapot. All within the consortium will now understand what was recorded and satisfy their leading concern, which is to make billable returns using classification of tableware version 9. They still lack the distinction between NOS and NEC and may need to employ professional coders to abstract and map records manually. Classifications, such as the ICD family, include items like chronic airway obstruction, not elsewhere classified, other specified excision of adrenal gland. The chocolate teapot 60. A problem with such constructs is that they are not stable in meaning across versions of the classification. For instance, what is classified elsewhere may change with addition or removal of other content. In contrast to classifications such as ICD-9, modern medical terminologies such as SNOMED CT typically do not mandate coding to leaf and do not allow not otherwise specified or self-referential entities such as not elsewhere classified. The widespread assumption is that this provides immunity from semantic discontinuity across releases. It does not. In the absence of NOS and NEC, these static known unknowns become unknown unknowns mobile between releases. As Donald Rumsfeld famously said, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. The situation is further exacerbated if a terminology is neither exhaustive at any one level of siblings nor disjoint. Two sets are disjoint if they have no element in common. As terminologies evolve, applications involving data reuse, such as messaging, billing, clinical audit, and active decision support, need to specify what version of the terminology a code is drawn from. Successive versions may improve content, but such alterations create circumstances where interpretation of recorded data requires reference to the ontology, as it was when the concept was chosen, not as it is now. A concept within a terminology is not entire unto itself. Addition, retirement, and movement of other concepts alter its use and interpretation. Such changes are common. As well as additions and retirements, there may be many hierarchy changes in each release of a terminology, such as SNOMED CT. References 1. Okrent A. In the Land of Invented Languages. New York, Spiegel and Grau, 2010. 2. Blois MS. Information and Medicine, The Nature of Medical Descriptions. Berkeley, University of California Press, 1984. 3. Choose of the items due to controlled medical vocabulary and strip A. B. To the standards could reasonably be foreseen to cause harm to others. It is a principal precept of bioeth for causing harm to a patient. The IT systems that support clinical care have been observed to contribute to patient harm in many ways. For example, storing data against the wrong patient. The IT systems that support clinical care have been observed to contribute to patient harm in many ways. For example, storing data against the wrong patient. Failing to prevent systems that support clinical care system is that it must be safe. That is, that the system itself is not responsible for causing harm to a patient. The IT systems that support clinical care have been observed to contribute to causability 1 Nature 1995, 487-92. 17. Schirmer M. Rumsfeld's Wisdom. Sci. Am. 2093 38. References 63. Springer Nature Switzerland AD 2021. T. Benson. G. Grieve. Principles of Health Interoperability. Health Information Technology Standards. h//doi.org/10-107-99783-56883-244. Safety first, do no harm. Duty of care is the paramount responsibility of all clinical professions. It is the moral and legal responsibility of a person or organization to avoid doing anything that could reasonably be foreseen to cause harm to others. It is a principal precept of bioethics universally acknowledged. A fundamental consideration of any clinical system is that it must be safe. That is, that the system itself is not responsible for causing harm to a patient. The IT systems that support clinical care have been observed to contribute to patient harm in many ways. For example, storing data against the wrong patient, failing to prevent dangerous levels of medications to be prescribed. Safety is a property of the clinical system of care. The clinical system of care is the combination of people, processes, and the IT systems that support them. Information management systems are just one part of the overall system. They cannot be safe in an abstract fashion. Safety is one part of the overall design framework for an information system, as is interoperability. It is hard to think about the safety of interoperability specifications and approaches as independent entities. However, it is important to think about clinical safety at this abstract level. Clinical practice is a team game, with many disparate care providers, each with their own care systems, interacting to care for a patient. Their capability to collaborate and coordinate depends on the exchange of information between the systems. This is fundamental. The biggest determinants of the overall safety of the system are what information can be exchanged, how consistently, and when it can be exchanged. These are created and controlled by the interoperability standards and the health informatics that drives them. For this reason, safety must be a primary consideration of both health informatics and interoperability specifications. In practice, however, the topic is rarely treated as paramount. Every person performing system design, data exchange, or analysis needs to be acutely conscious of safety throughout the whole life cycle of their work. The purpose of this chapter is lay out the fundamental considerations for safety, both in principle and as applied to health informatics. This chapter cannot solve real-world safety problems, but it can identify the key issues practitioners need to be aware of and provide a framework to assist implementers to build safe systems. Safety principles. Safety is a property of an organization, not a destination that can be achieved. A safe organization is one with a culture of ongoing concern around safety, with strong policies and processes that support making the culture effective. As such, safety is a leadership issue. Safety and change culture are deeply intertwined. Does an organization have the honesty to reassess current practice when safety issues exist, or do the organization's defense mechanisms prevent that? Is the organization even looking for safety issues? And then, if change is proposed or considered, how do safety considerations enter the process? Are they used to prevent change, or does change happen irrespective of safety concerns? The process of healthcare is inherently risky, which is unlike most other industries. No sane person would choose to travel in a plane with a 5% chance of crashing during a given flight, but people routinely choose to have medical procedures with a higher chance of a fatal outcome than that. The key is that the alternative is usually worse. Healthcare safety is widely overlooked when compared to airline safety. The only safe healthcare provider is one with no patients. Furthermore, the clinical care process cannot stop if its information system support stops. Care goes on irrespective. This means that any operational clinical system with high dependence on IT also needs backup plans and redundancy to enable continuity of care. This duality brings further safety risks and represents yet another challenge relatively specific to healthcare. Money spent on improving safety is not spent on direct patient care. This doesn't mean that concern shouldn't be shown for safety or that money shouldn't be spent on it. Indeed, a great deal of both happens for several good reasons. Much of the focus on safety is in fact around managing liability and building trust. In 2000, the Institute of Medicine published an influential report, To Err is Human, which estimated that as many as 98,000 people died each year from medical errors in American hospitals. 1. It asserted that the problem was not bad people, but good people working in healthcare systems that needed to be made much safer. A follow-up report proposed that people should be able to count on receiving safe healthcare. This needed a healthcare delivery system that both prevents errors and learns from them when they occur. This requires health information systems for Safety 65 that, 1, provide immediate access to complete patient information and decision support tools for clinicians and their patients, and 2, capture patient safety information as a byproduct of care and use this information to design even safer delivery systems. For a more recent open access review of patient safety, see Vincent and Amalberti. Definitions. Safe care involves making evidence-based clinical decisions to maximize health outcomes and to minimize the potential for harm. Errors of commission and omission should be avoided. An adverse event is an event that results in unintended harm to the patient by an act of commission or omission rather than by the underlying disease or condition of the patient. An error is the failure of a planned action to be completed as intended, i.e., error of execution, or the use of the wrong plan to achieve an aim, i.e., error of planning. It also includes failure of an unplanned action that should have been completed, omission. A near miss S is an error of commission or omission that could have harmed the patient, but serious harm did not occur as a result of chance. E.g., the patient received a contraindicated drug but did not experience an adverse drug reaction. Prevention. E.g., a potentially lethal overdose was prescribed, but a nurse identified the error before administering the medication. Or mitigation. E.g., a lethal drug overdose was administered but discovered early and countered with an antidote. Impact of change. The consequence of changing a clinical process is less well understood than it should be. This diagram shows the rate of adverse events for as particular process before and after a change. Most deliberate changes to a clinical process are caused by systematizing some process using some kind of new technology or in a new fashion. Typical examples might be introducing a medication management system, changing an ambulance prioritization dispatch system to be expert system-based rather than human-based, changing patient registration to take a photo of the patient to display in the user interface of the patient record system. Whatever the change, some aspect of the process is systematized with the intention of reducing adverse events, at least as one of the goals. The change won't impotent. Impact of Change 66 address some of the causes of adverse events. These are beyond the reach of the systemic change, but it will, hopefully, prevent a significant cause of adverse events, and so make the system safer. This is shown in Fig 4.1. It is almost inevitable, however, that the new system itself will cause new types of adverse events. No matter how much planning and testing is done, clinical care systems are complex adaptive processes and display emergent behavior, so managers should expect some new kind of adverse event to emerge. Typical examples. An ambulance dispatch system was changed from being based on post-it notes on a wall to an expert system, which immediately reduced ambulance waiting times and associated morbidity and mortality. However, some kinds of situations were not given sufficient priority by the expert system, so some patients suffered much longer waiting times. A medication management system based on barcode scanning is introduced to a hospital. Immediately, misadministration events drop precipitously. But now, although the system behaves consistently, configuration errors lead to repeated wrong administration of a wrong medication. The result of systematizing some aspect of the process is to create new systematic errors. Usually these are much rarer than the random errors that they replace, but they can be much more serious when they occur. One common feature is that Fig. 4.1 change in adverse events before and after change 4, Safety 67. These are sins of commission, and it can be more costly to the change sponsor than the sins of omission that they replace. This doesn't mean that change should not happen, just that the sponsors need contingency plans in place for watching out for such events and be proactive about managing them. Culture. This brings us back to culture. One particularly important aspect of this is that one of the most common clinical process changes is to integrate two different clinical systems. This can address identified safety issues in a clinical handover process, which is well recognized as a primary cause of adverse events. Every information system has some degeneracy associated with it. This arises when the users keep informal knowledge about gaps between the way that the system is used in practice and the functionality of the information system. An example of this is using the special date 1 Jan 1901 to mean date of birth unknown. The degree to which a system has degeneracy may quickly be estimated by the average number of post-it notes per access point. Note that this metric is becoming worse as more and more systems go to access on any device, which increases the danger of such degeneracy. Integrating two different silos often results in additional the degeneracy outside the informal social network in which it is safely managed, with potential safety problems. The sponsors of the integration work should have a well-rehearsed escalation pathway for responding to emergent issues, and this should be part of any project plan for implementing data exchange. London Protocol. A key part of any safety-focused organization is to investigate adverse events when they are reported. Except, of course, that few people report adverse event. Instead, they raise a complaint about unexpected morbidity and/or mortality. Further investigation may lead to this being classified as an adverse event. The London Protocol, which was developed at Imperial College, London, is a formal protocol for investigating such reports to determine whether they are adverse events and what the underlying cause were. It is available free of charge for. It is also known as ALARM and ALARM 3. The conceptual framework is shown in FHIR 4.2. The conceptual basis is that an incident only occurs when care delivery problems, poor care process, are not prevented by the defenses that the organization has put in place. Care delivery problems, CDPs, however, are not the root cause of the incident. They arise due to contributory factors that create CDPs, but not are. Impact Active 68. FHIR 4.2 London Protocol Conceptual Framework. FHIR 4.3 London Protocol Flowchart 4. Safety 69 barriers. These can usually be traced back to problems in the management and processes of the organization. Note that not all incidents can be traced back to such problems. As described above, clinical medicine is inherently unsafe. Everybody dies in the end. The London Protocol is a formal protocol for how to do the investigation. The process follows a basic pattern shown in FHIR 4.3. Each step in the process is described in detail in the full documentation. Note that despite the London Protocol being widely regarded and followed, it doesn't mention information systems once, either as a source of information about what happened or as a potential cause of incidents. This demonstrates that we have some way to go in terms of maturity of thinking around the relationship between clinical systems and information systems. Nevertheless, the London Protocol is the best developed protocol available at this time for investigating incidents, and all clinical providers should have safety staff well-versed in its use. Information system vendors should have clinical staff familiar with capabilities and configuration of the information system that can help the institution carry out a thorough investigation using it. Application design. Clinical safety is a tough challenge for application designers. As discussed above, safety is a property of a clinical system, not the application itself. Further, for good reasons, most clinical safety analysis, advice, and writing is focused on the point of implementation, which is highly context-specific. The applications are often highly configurable. Users can choose how to use the application. The designers get little useful systematic feedback about safety. In fact, application designers usually only hear about safety after a dramatic failure caused by their application, and their usual first response is something along the lines of, "You were doing what?" Yet in spite of this, applications are very often the major input into the overall safety of the system, and this is increasingly true as information systems become more comprehensive. Table 4.1. To understand why vendors think the way they do, look at typical requests for proposals, RFPs, for clinical systems, and consider the weighting between price, functionality, and safety. Safety usually comes a distant third. It doesn't help that it's intangible, of course. The consequence of this is that vendors don't prioritize safety relative to price and functionality. There is a trilemma: cheap, functional, safe. You can't have all three. In one sense, it's easy to design a safe system. Any system that meets a user's expectations will feel safe. However, this is extremely difficult in practice because application design 70, every user has a different expectation. If you change the consensus group, you change the consensus. FHIR safety checklist. The FHIR specification includes a safety checklist. 1. This checklist has been built over the years as the community observes common pitfalls in implementations that have either led to documented adverse events or an active concern that there will be adverse events. See FHIR 4.4. The safety checklist isn't the final say in this matter. It's just an example of how any health informatics or interoperability community should approach this. All communities of interest, whether open standards organizations or vendor consortium, or a closed community such as the development team for a vendor and key customer staff, should have an active process for creating institutional memory from observed actual or potential adverse events. Almost all interoperability developments occur in a limited context with one to a few trading partners and relatively well-controlled requirements. However, experience shows that over time, new participants and new requirements will creep into the ecosystem, and safety features that appeared unnecessary in a well-controlled system turn out to be necessary after all. Ignore these checks at your peril. Some of the key safety issues in FHIR are discussed briefly below. 1HHL7.org FR/safety.html. Table 4.1 Safety Issues in Information Systems Issue Description Focus. Most advice is focused on the point of care. There is little formal knowledge sharing about safe application design. Conflict. Application designers get conflicting advice around what is safe. Domain gap. The knowledge and experience gap between application designer and application user is very wide. Broken loop. The feedback loop from error detection to source is broken. Users often know of the problems, but do not share this information with the application designers. Last stop. Healthcare is the last stop. Errors in healthcare don't fall out to an external system. This exacerbates the broken loop above. Design speed system design has a slow turnover. It can take a decade for a major design change to move from concept to proven market solution. Clinical safety considerations demand instant change, or at least response to adverse events on a much shorter timescale. Perception gap. Users think vendors do not care about safety. Vendors believe that users won't pay for safety. Information resistance. Clinical information is poorly described. It is unlike double-entry bookkeeping, sorted out centuries ago. Applications are not automating working manual solutions here. They are developing new ways of working from scratch. Furthermore, the application information standards are arcane and complex due to the complexity in the underlying information that supports healthcare. For Safety 71, full lifecycle, modifier elements modifier extension must support distributed resource identification, current resources HTTP errors, patient links, capability statement, validation, observation and focus, time zones, date formats, missing resources, client warnings, search completion, correct error messages, correct filters, how deletion is marked, update deleted, records test, deleted records, is consent granted, account of disclosure, system clock synchronized, basic context, DNS authentication, inquiry tie-in on the wire, Communicatelin security, TLS, SMIME, production exchange, authentication authorization, OAuth OpenID Connect, application security labels, narratives, access control, integrity inputs, provenance and audit logs, course, cross-origin resource sharing, other JSON support, JSON errors, format header, error trapping, privacy deletion, FHIR safety checklist, search date time, conformance FIG, 4.4, FHIR safety checklist, application design 72, full lifecycle. For each resource that my system handles the full lifecycle, status codes, record currency issues, and erroneous entry status. Many resources have a lifecycle tied to some business process. Applications are not required to implement the full business lifecycle. They should implement what is needed, but systems need to fail explicitly if the lifecycle they expect does not match the content of the resources they are receiving. A common and important area where applications fail to interoperate correctly is when records are created in error or linked to the wrong context, and then must be retracted. For instance, when a diagnostic report is sent to an EHR linked to the wrong patient. There are a variety of ways to handle this, with different implications for the record-keeping outcomes. Failure to get this right is a well-known area of clinical safety failure. The FHIR specification makes some rules around how erroneous entry of resources is indicated. Applications should ensure that they handle these correctly. Modifiers. For each resource that my system handles, I have reviewed the modifier elements. In resource definitions, several elements are marked as modifying elements. Implementers are not required to support these elements in any meaningful fashion. However, they are required to ensure that their systems do not inappropriately ignore any of the possible values of the modifier elements. This may be achieved by ensuring that these values will never occur through proper use of the system, e.g., documenting that the system only handles human patients, throwing an exception if an unsupported value is received, ignoring the element that contains the modifier element so that the value is irrelevant anyway. Note that applications that store and echo or forward resources are not processing the resources. Processing the resources means extracting data from them for display, conversion to some other format, or some form of automated processing. Modifier extensions. My system checks for modifier extension elements. Modifier extensions are only seen rarely, but when they exist, they mean that an implementer has extended an element with something that changes the meaning of the element, and it is not safe to ignore the extension. For safety purposes, implementers should routinely add a code instruction like this. Assert object.has no modifiers. Object at path sent p has unknown modifier extensions. This should be done for each object processed. Of course, the exact manifestation of this instruction varies depending on the language. Performing these checks for Safety 73 is a chore, so it is frequently not done, but it should be done for safety purposes. Note that one cheap way to achieve this is to write a statement in the documentation of the application. Do not send this application any modifier extensions. Like all cheap ways, this is likely to not be as effective as actually checking for extensions throughout an application. Must support. My system supports elements labeled as must support in the profiles that apply to my system. Implementation guides can mark elements as must support. This means that although the element is optional, an application must be able to populate or read the element correctly. What precisely it means to do this correctly varies widely, so implementation guides must indicate exactly what they mean when marking an element as must support, and applications that claim to conform need to do whatever is prescribed. Distributed resource identification. My system has documented how distributed resource identification works in its relevant contexts of use, and where and why contained resources are used. Many of the clinical safety issues that arise in practice arise from misalignment between systems around how identification and identifiers work. In the FHIR context, this risk is particularly acute given how easy it is to develop interfaces and connect systems together. Any applications that assign identifiers or create resources with an explicit identity should document their assumptions and processes around this. This is particularly important where there is the prospect of more than two trading partners. The same applies to contained resources. A system should refrain from using contained resources as much as possible, and where necessary, document the usage. Current resources. My system manages lists of current resources correctly. If the system has current lists, it must be clear how to get the correct current list. Note that managing the list of current records is a more subtle problem than it sounds. Record-keeping systems may have records claiming to be current because they were current when the record was made, but they are no longer current. Also, what is current is often a matter of subjective and/or contextual judgment. HTTP errors. When other systems return HTTP errors from the RESTful API and operations, perhaps using operation outcome, my system checks for them and handles them appropriately. Ignoring errors or not handling them properly is a common operational problem when integrating systems. FHIR implementers should audit their system explicitly Application Design 74 to be sure that the HTTP status code is always checked and errors in operation outcomes are handled correctly. Capability statement. My system publishes a conformance statement with structure definitions, value sets, and operation definitions, etc. So other
It's too technical. I don't know if I'll know that or not, but I will stop the streaming soon.
implementers know how the system functions. While servers have no choice but to publish a conformance statement, the degree of detail is up to the implementer. The more detail published, the easier it will be for systems to integrate. Validation. My system produces valid resources. It is common to encounter production systems that generate invalid V2 messages or CDA documents. All sorts of invalid content can be encountered, including invalid syntax due to not escaping properly, wrong codes, see chap 15, and disagreement between narrative and data. In the FHIR ecosystem, some public servers scrupulously validate all resources, while others do not. It is common to hear implementers announce at Connectathon that their implementation is complete because it works against a non-validating server and not worry about the fact it does not work against the validating servers. Use the validation services, see below, to check that your resources really are valid, and make sure that you use a DOM, document object model, or are very careful to escape all your strings. Implicit rules. Check for implicit rules. All resources can carry an implicit rules pointer, see chap 7. While this is discouraged, there are cases where it is needed. If a resource has an implicit rules reference, you must refuse to process it unless you know the reference. Remember to check for this. Consent. My system checks that the right patient consent has been granted, where applicable. Patient consent requirements vary around the world. FHIR includes the ability to track and exchange patient consent explicitly, which is a relatively new integration capability. Various jurisdictions are still feeling out how to exchange consent to meet legislative and cultural requirements. Encryption. Production exchange of patient or other sensitive data will always use some form of encryption on the wire. This is an obvious thing to say in principle, but it is extremely common to find insecure exchange of healthcare data in practice. FHIR does not mandate that all exchange be encrypted, though many implementers have commented that it should. For Safety 75. There are some valid use cases not to use encryption, such as terminology distribution, etc. Implementers should check that their systems are secure. Security labels. My system makes the right provenance statements and audit event logs and uses the right security labels where appropriate. See chat port 11 for a brief discussion of provenance and audit event, and see below for a discussion of security labels. The record-keeping requirements have been reviewed, and provenance and audit trail are used properly to meet those requirements. Narrative. My system can render narratives properly where they are used. Resources can contain text, data, or both. Systems are not obliged to be able to display the narrative. They can always choose to process the data. But in many cases, it is a good idea to offer the user a choice to see the original narrative of the resource, or resources in many cases, particularly for clinical resources. This might be described as see original document in a user-relevant language. The FHIR specification makes no explicit requirements in this regard, since the correct behavior is so variable. Implementers should judge for themselves what is appropriate in this regard. References 1. Institute of Medicine. To err is human, building a safer health system.
Alright guys, so I'll stop streaming now. I'll come back once I am rejuvenized. I think the 1.5 hour limit really is like a class saving for me. I don't know why. Well, I just getting distracted and everything. Interesting. Anyway,